Okay, so my name is Andrea Reimer. I was specifically asked to not talk about myself at the beginning of the presentation, but I find it's quite impossible to know where someone's going to if you don't know where they're coming from. And as John said, I'm challenging, so I will be talking about myself a bit. And in that spirit, I did want to start by acknowledging the Massachusetts and Wampanoag Indigenous peoples on whose traditional territories we're meeting today, to give my respect to their elders, past and present. I also wanted to thank the Loeb Fellowship for this opportunity to speak with all of you here today. So this is where I'm coming from. I'm a city councillor, an elected official, a politician. My talk today is going to be less about a good building, a good housing policy, or a good urban plan, and more about how to get a city council, whether good or bad, to approve good things. Many people have different opinions about politicians. I have one as well, and I believe that there are only really two kinds of politicians. The first kind is that sees unmet community needs and sees elected office as a vehicle for being able to meet those needs. And then the other kind is the kind that has an unmet personal need and sees public office as a way to meet that. And as a society, we tend to remember this kind more. There is a very good reason for that. They are compelling, but it is because we're biologically programmed to remember the negative. So I want you to imagine yourself as a Cro-Mag on the savannah. So your very survival depends on your ability to remember that your good friend yesterday ate a plant that killed them, or a big-ass lion killed them, or some other threat, a cliff, something. So our brains are specifically hardwired to be able to remember negative things so that our genes could be here today in this room, so our Cro-Mag ancestors could survive. It's also why I'm pretty convinced that my genes come from a completely different species. That's me at 18. My journey in life has always been about a relentless pursuit of positive alternatives for the future. And it started really early. So what you see here is a big pile of raisins. What I see is a big pile of torture. I have a lifelong dislike of raisins because of the quality of raisins that I was served in preschool. However, I had a positive vision of the future, so I decided we would organize in preschool, and we organized a nap-in. We slept, and it had two results: marginally better snacks, no more raisins, and a lifelong understanding that alone we are weak, but together, even when we're sleeping, we are very powerful. So imagine what would happen if we were awake. That idea has carried me through a lot of community organizing. As the executive director of the largest membership-based environmental organization in Canada, I was responsible for overseeing campaigns that preserved over 1.2 million hectares of pristine wilderness areas, set legal precedents to preserve endangered species in Canada. We just got our endangered species legislation in Canada in the mid-2000s, and successfully negotiated on behalf of environment groups to get the first carbon tax in North America in my province of British Columbia. I also have sat through a lot of evening meetings and volunteered for many organizations on everything from democratic reform to establishing financial services for low-income communities. My most significant personal win, however, was getting off the streets. I left home quite young, started doing drugs quite early, and managed to do a lot of things that you kind of hope your kids and your friends' kids and even your enemies' kids don't do and don't see. I generally don't tell the story because I find that in it people want to cast me as some kind of community hero. The reality of the story is that it's about a community of heroes. People who fail tend to do it alone. People who succeed do it because they have a community of support around them, and I had that. So by now, you're probably getting that I am one of those politicians that got into elected office because I see unmet community needs. I'm not that excited about microphones. I'm super unexcited about that camera, but I refuse to accept that a positive vision of the world isn't possible and that it isn't worth making yourself a little, if not a lot, uncomfortable in the fight for it. I had an opportunity to volunteer for the Green Party in 1996. And although I am and remain ambivalent about party politics, I am not ambivalent about my vision for a positive future, and this was part of a vehicle to get there. It was in the course of that I met a woman named Colleen McCurry. So Colleen, sorry, Canadian reference, but Colleen McCurry was the winner of the Goldman Prize and one of the planet's greatest heroes in the fight for preserving ancient temperate rainforest. So while the great Raisin Napin demonstrated to me the power of organizing, Colleen really taught me how to organize at a very grassroots level. It wasn't until her funeral, she passed away quite suddenly in 2007, that I realized that I'd spent all this time with this woman who was fighting so hard under such difficult circumstances. She lived in a logging dependent community to preserve wilderness around her home, that actually she hadn't been fighting to protect the wilderness, she had been fighting to protect a way of life, that the ancient forest that surrounded her home, the salmon, the grizzlies, they were intrinsically linked in her mind to her and her mother and her father and her 8 siblings sitting around the table in this house that had been built at the turn of the century, and that the loss of one, the loss of the forest and the grizzlies and the salmon, to her meant absolutely the loss of the other. So it was then that I decided to redouble the efforts to preserve my home, Vancouver. So unlike Colleen, as I said, her vision was about the past and keeping that intact. My vision is about a positive future. So I had 3 big ideas that I ran on for the future I saw for Vancouver. In case you're wondering what it's like to be a woman in politics, when this article ran, 3 subsequent articles ran about it, not one of them about any of those ideas, but rather about my hair and the makeup that I was uncharacteristically wearing. How you get those things done is a lot more complicated. So one of the policies I'm most passionate about is democratic reform, but it needs to rest on a foundation of open data. And the reason for that is that people are only ever as equal as their access to information is. That's a very fundamental and powerful idea in a democracy. So in 2009, the year I was elected, Vancouver passed world-leading open data policy. Going first was really scary. I invited my colleagues to jump off a cliff with me, which I thought would be inspiring, but apparently lots of people don't like to jump off cliffs. I actually paraglide, so to me, cliffs are a great opportunity, but our policy became the gold standard on which other cities base their policies. Open data is not just about democracy. BC Business named us the most innovative organization in BC in 2011 as a result of the policy, the first time they had ever chosen something that wasn't a business. And they did it based on open data as a modern economic enabler. This is a result that we never expected, and it gave us the courage to be able to take on being the first city in Canada and one of the first in the world to develop a public digital strategy in 2012. And just last month, as a result of the work in this strategy, we won the most digitally transformed institution in Canada, business or public sector. So we now have almost 90,000 tech jobs as a result of these layers of policy that have been built, and are the #1 startup economy in Canada and in the top 20 in the world. The point of all of this, however, is that none of this would have happened without jumping off that original cliff. We wanted Vancouver to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. When we started in 2009, people said, and remembering that we're Canadians, it wasn't even worth trying. Then they said, it's impossible. Then they said, well, okay, maybe it's possible. And now what they say is, why aren't we there yet? In 9 years, we've reduced waste by 27%, water consumption by 18%, increased green jobs by 49%, and grown Vancouver's brand value to $31.5 billion on the strength of this work. More than 50% of residents now walk, bike, or take transit to work. We've implemented the world's greenest building code and become the first major city in the Americas to commit to 100% renewable energy for all sources, electricity, heating, and transportation. This has allowed us to reduce our carbon footprint to 3.9 tons per person, the lowest per capita emission in the Americas. We went from below the 500th greenest city in the world, they only rank the top 500, to now being the 3rd greenest city in the world. And we did it at a time when our Prime Minister may wear a sweater and look like Mr. Rogers, but he actually has a lot more ideologically in common with Donald Trump. This is our previous Prime Minister. We've got a little bit better one now. There are many other examples that I could give you of this kind of policy. We have world-leading work on reconciliation with Indigenous people. We had created plans in low-income communities where, again, everybody said it wasn't possible. In 135 years in Vancouver, no plan was ever done for our poorest communities because it just wasn't considered possible, and yet in 2014 we were able to do it. We've worked on opening up streets to people as public space. We have the largest municipal childcare program in Canada. We've passed a gender equity strategy, which is one of the leading ones in the world, and we have an engaged city strategy, which seeks not only to engage the city with residents, but residents with each other. We're the first city in Canada to do rental-only zoning, the first globally to use deliberative democracy to develop a community plan. We established the first Renters Advisory Committee in the US and Canada. We also brought in an empty homes tax and signed an Airbnb agreement that just freed up 3,000 new rental units in the city of Vancouver. But no matter how good the policy that I'm doing was, on the news every night, I have to go home and watch the thing that enables all of this democracy kind of dissolving all around me. I could no more sit silent witness to that than I would feel uncomfortable about a microphone or a camera and not feel compelled to take action on it. So here I am, made an announcement that I wouldn't be running for public office again because I felt that the work that I could do outside public office would have more benefit to democracy in the near term. So in my original hypothesis, when I wrote my application to the Loeb Fellowship, I said, in the gap between public expectation and political guilds lies the unfulfilled potential of Western democracies. Democracy was never intended to be professionalized. In order for it to work, you need language and processes that are accessible to all people. Indeed, in the fully actualized democracy of Locke and Jefferson, the populace would become increasingly adept at decision-making, and thus the quality of decisions would continue to improve by virtue of the ever-increasing lived experiences the decisions were able to reference. So creating a Democracy 101 seemed like an obvious pursuit, if that is what you believe the problem statement to be. But my preliminary thinking was flawed. I have looked around, and it turns out there are a lot of manuals about democracy out there, and I already know this, but checking my own head on it, democracy is actually remarkably well designed compared to other systems. There is, however, frequent and pervasive user error, and a lot of it goes back to the fact that we don't understand this. So I have realized that this is the inquiry that I need to undertake, that I'm here to undertake. I might guess what you're thinking, as that word is really, I made it big on purpose, because power is a big thing. So back to that Cro-Mag thing on the savannah, when we say the word power, we tend to think about this. We think about people with positional power, that have titles that give them that power. And that is definitely one kind of power, but there are so many other kinds of power. Gandhi was born with no positional power, none at all. In fact, probably the negative of positional power. And yet he had a spiritual power that he used to develop expert power, informational power, referent power, that eventually gave him the positional power that he needed to be able to make the changes that he saw, the positive future he saw for India. Serena Williams, no positional power there. Tennis player is not, it's not like president, right? It's not like Gandhi. And yet she has managed to dominate headlines over this last week on vital issues of societal importance. Tennis, yes, but also important issues about race and gender. Jane Jacobs, expert power. Jane Jacobs did not come into the world with a ton of positional power, but she was able to leverage her acquiring of knowledge and her status as an expert into huge positional power, remains, after her death, still the foremost expert on urban policy and planning from a grassroots community perspective. Of course, people power. This is the Women's March in Washington. I Americanized it for you. I would normally show the Canadian version. And then probably the biggest power that exists on planet Earth, and that is the person who is able to marshal the people and create the people power. Can we build thousands of green, engaged, reconciled cities where social and economic justice are actively being addressed? Yes, but only if the people most affected have the room, have the power to inform what is being done in their communities, whether it's climate action, economic justice, densification, or reconciliation. Like anything, it starts with increased literacy, and that's what I'm here to learn how to do so I can understand how to translate that into literacy in my community. In the language of the people of my territory, the homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, Haichka, it kind of means thank you. It's hard to translate, but I would convey that I believe it is a great gift to have the time and resources to undertake this inquiry. So I wanted to offer that thanks to all of you. I'm looking forward to learning from you. And if there's anything that I can share with you about the power jamming that we've been able to do in Vancouver, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.